At the time, I was living in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had a bike. I had just recently gotten the bike, and this bike had been with me since I was maybe 7 years old. My dad had gotten it for me for Christmas, and I had taken it everywhere I had moved. So I had it in Pittsburgh, and I had it in Ada, Ohio, and then I had it in Cleveland, Ohio. And I loved this bike. It was white and turquoise, and it said Free Spirit on the side, which is the Sears brand of bicycle. So I went to work, and I drove to work this day. Sometimes I would ride my bike to work, but I left my bicycle in the garage, and the garage was one that was a pull-down garage. So I didn't pull down the garage, and my bike was sitting in the garage. The garage was set far back from the street, and you had to walk in between our house, which was divided into apartments, and the neighbor's house. So it was pretty imposing, and you couldn't really see the garage very well from the street. So I thought it would be fine, and I came back from work, and I pulled into the garage, and I looked around, and my bicycle wasn't there. And I'm like, what could have happened? I was living with my sister, so I called my sister on the phone, and I asked her if she had maybe moved it, or if she had any idea what could have happened to it. And she said no, she had no idea what could have happened to it. So I realized my bike had been stolen. My precious bike that I'd had for, over 10 years, that I was sentimentally attached to, had been stolen. So I didn't know what to do. I went to the neighbor's house, and I knocked on the door, asked if they had seen anything, and they said no, but bikes kept getting stolen from this neighborhood. I guess this was common. They said that their bikes had all been stolen a few months ago, and they had just bought new ones. So I called the cops, because I didn't know what else to do. So I called the cops, and they said that because the bike hadn't been registered, they even came to the house, but there was really no way that they would be able to figure out who had stolen my bike. They said this happens all the time. It's kids that do it. They just, go house to house and steal bikes. They did say, there was this sale at the end of the year where all these bikes, because they would just the kids would just dump the bikes after they, if they found a cooler bike to steal, they would just dump them. So people would wake up and have these bicycles on their front lawn that these kids had dropped. So they sell those bikes at the end of the year, at the end of the summer. So maybe there was some hope that I could get my bike back then. But otherwise, not really. So I am so furious at myself. I'm like, why didn't I shut the garage? And I'm thinking, maybe it just got stolen. Maybe some kid just took that bike before I pulled into the driveway. So I go out to the street, and I look down the street. I look around, and I see this little boy, and he's on a bike that seems very much oversized for him. So I start walking quickly toward him, and the closer I get, I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's probably it. And so I start running, and I yell, hey, you kid. And, the kid is sort of hesitating, but, he doesn't want to stop, because I probably was horrifying at that moment. But I kept yelling, and finally he stopped, and this little kid, I get to him, and he's really little, and he's like trembling, sort of. And so I approach him, and once I'm about 15 feet away from him, I realize that's not my bike. It's not even white. It is a different color. It's so blatantly not my bike. So I'm like, okay, well, I can't really just be like, never mind at this point. So I'll have to tell him something. And I said, well, my bike was stolen today, and it's white and turquoise, and it says Free Spirit on the side. So, if you see it, or if you know who took it, you tell him to come to my house. I live in that house right there. And the little boy looked at me, and he said, okay. And so I walked away very forcefully, as if that had been my intention the entire time. I get to the house, and I'm very sad. I don't want to sit in the house. I'm like, it's somewhere in this neighborhood, it's around here somewhere. There's some slight hope that maybe I could find it. So I walk around the neighborhood and I call my sister and I tell her what had happened. Now, the neighborhood, it is a suburb in Cleveland, so it's relatively big. On a bike, you can go a pretty far distance. And it's mostly suburban. There are houses, on every block, and then you can walk down to a Walgreens, and there's like a place where there were like some restaurants and bars and shops and that sort of thing. So I walked to that area and I decide to have a coffee and, maybe read a book, take my mind off of it. So I walk into the coffee shop and Matt is the barista and he says, all right, he asks how I am and I say, I'm horrible, my bike has been stolen today. And he said, yeah, he knew something like 5 people within the last few days, all of their bikes had been stolen. So I wasn't the only one, but it didn't make it any better. But I was sort of coming to grips with it. And I finished my coffee and I decided, okay, well, go home, meet up with my sister. So I walk back toward my house and I have to walk. It's probably 3 blocks to my house, or maybe more like 5 blocks. So I start walking and I'm walking up a hill. And as I'm halfway up the hill, this group of kids ride their bicycles right in front of me into this alley that sort of dead ends there. And they stop in the alley. And as they ride in front of me, I see a bike, and it's white, and it's turquoise, and it says Free Spirit on the side. And I'm like, that's actually my bike. So the kids stop in the alley, and I look at the kid who's on my bike and I say, hey, what is your bike? What does it say on the side of it? And he says, what? I don't know. I said, it says Free Spirit on the side of it, doesn't it? Yeah, that's my bike, and it was stolen from my house today right up the street here. So he says, my cousin gave me this bike. I said, well, then your cousin stole it from my house because it was stolen today. And I started to explain to him that I was sentimentally attached to this bike and, my father gave it to me and it was on Christmas and it was magical and it was my first bike ever. And I rode it around watching the moon set in Ada, Ohio. And after a while, he finally relented and he's like, all right, fine, you can have the bike back. So I said, thank you. And I got on the bike and I sort of rode into the sunset, so to speak. And it really must have been karma that was there that day, because that's how I got the bike back.